And welcome to part two of Steve Rowland, the man of the dog. And today we're also introducing Maylin Dog. Could you hold up Maylin a little bit so we can see?
It's full doggage. It's doggage. I'm going to put her down, Richard, because it's not fair for her.
Well, I wouldn't put her down. I think she's great.
She is great.
So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Maylin.
Thank you, Maylin.
So, Steve, we still haven't finished with LA yet, and I just want to ask a couple of questions. So there are two films that I'd like you to just tell us a little bit about. Crime in the Streets. That's a really interesting film, interesting director, and interesting co-stars. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in that.
I was with an agency, Paul Small Agency, and I was not sent out to audition for this film, but a friend of mine was, and we both went together to Sam Goldwyn Studios. And there was a few people there waiting to go in to be interviewed. And then my friend went in and he came out right away. And when he came out, the person that opened the door for him looked and saw me sitting there and said, "Are you here for the interview?" And I said, "No, I just came along with my friend." And she said, "Would you come in, please? Because we'd like to interview you." So I went in and I got the part.
Pretty incredible team of people you were working with.
John Cassavetes, Sal Mineo, Mark Rydell, who became a film director, and it got great reviews. They bring it back all the time. It was done on the stage at Sam Goldwyn Studios. I don't know, it was one of my favorite films.
What was Cassavetes actually like as a guy to work with?
Well, John Cassavetes was a great guy, a very intellectual guy and very easy to talk to. And of course, then when I moved to London, he was there and I had some time with him. He was really a terrific guy and a very studious person. He studied acting, he studied writing, he studied all that. And I think it showed in his films.
Absolutely. Were there any kind of conceptual things that were specific to him about the way that he made the film?
Not particularly. He had a very good director, Don Siegel. And Don Siegel was a top director in those days. And he and Don Siegel, they got on fantastically well. I wasn't privileged enough to know what they were speaking about, but I'm sure that John Cassavetes put his 2 cents in.
You would have been about 20 at this time?
Just turned 20.
Right, right. And what about Sal Mineo? I mean, obviously a lot has been written about him, but what was he like as a guy to work with as an actor?
Sal was a very good actor and a very nice guy. He was nothing like the character and nothing like the character in Rebel Without a Cause. He's very upfront, tough guy. And, you know, his looks defied what he was like, you know.
Right, because he always played a kind of a weak kind of character.
He was anything but that. Being an actor is not easy. Everybody thinks it's easy. Everybody thinks, oh, you guys, you know, it's not. It's a lot of work, especially mental work. If you're going to be a good actor, if you're going to listen, because acting is listening and reacting, not acting.
Sure.
So they were great at that.
Well, after that experience, you then did this film Gun Glory, which you've told me you had some interesting experiences on.
My father directed that film and he auditioned everybody but me. And I had a friend at the time by the name of John Ashley. John Ashley was a very wealthy kid that came from Oklahoma Oil. And he was a producer on many of the Filipino films that were made. Everybody had failed on the audition. So I asked my father, I said, Dad, listen, let me audition. I'll do a screen test with whoever, and we'll see. So I did a screen test, and the vote was with the producer and with him that I got the part. I thought I was absolutely terrible in it. I think it was the worst job I've ever done. But the one thing that I could do that a lot of these people couldn't do, that was to ride horses, do all kinds of things on horses, and was athletic.
Right.
And they needed that for this character. So I got the part. Oh, I wish I could do it over again.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because I worked with Stuart Granger, and I say this, I don't like to say terrible things about anybody, but I've worked in over 40 television shows, had a series, did 9 films, never had a problem with anybody, got along with everybody. The one person that was a complete asshole was Stuart Granger. He didn't like the idea. I mean, I was 20 years old, 20, 21 years old at the time. He didn't like the idea of when you came out of the gate at MGM Studios, of all the teenage girls rushing to get an autograph. And I said to him when he yelled at me on the set, I said, Mr. Granger, I said, I'm a young kid. These girls are young kids. First thing they're going to do is they're going to come after whoever the young person is in the film. I said, I've done so many fan magazine interviews and everything, they knew who I was. Oh, he didn't like it. He didn't like the fact that I played rock and roll music in my dressing room. He didn't like any of that. And finally, at the very end of the day, we were up in Garberville, California, which is up near Eureka. We were late getting on the plane, and they were waiting for us to get on the plane, just he and I. And when we got on the plane, he said, Steve held it up. I said, no, I didn't. We both held it up because you were absolutely tearing into me about every wrong thing you thought I did on the film. Possibly some of it was right if you want to know the truth. But he was that kind of a guy. And I am not the only person that says that about him. He was a good actor, good looking guy, was really athletic.
But
But as
isn't,
a person,
would you say, I mean, after all, he was older. What was he at the time? Probably about 50?
I'm not sure, but he was in his mid to late 40s. But I didn't like the way he treated his wife.
Yeah, but I mean, he sounds like the kind of guy who was just jealous of everybody and lamenting his lost youth, and he sees this young, good-looking guy, certainly with muscles, and he thinks, well, why is he getting all the attention?
Well, he was an arrogant guy, very, very arrogant and very much a narcissist.
Right.
And when you deal with people like that, I wish I knew then what I know now about how to deal with people like that. But none of us ever do when we're young.
No,
Jean Simmons was his wife. She
right.
was gorgeous and a lovely lady, lovely. And he treated her, man. I would never do things like that. You have to respect women. And he, come here, do this. Blah. Well, that's all I'm going to say about it. But he did a very good job.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your female co-star. Yes.
Oh, you're talking about Rhonda Fleming.
That's who I'm talking about.
Boy, was she a lovely person. Rhonda Fleming. I saw her when I moved to Palm Springs. I saw her down here, and she was in her 80s, and she looked almost as good as she did when we made the film. She was very easy to work with and really, really a nice person, and helped me a lot. Instead of being critical, she motivated me. She was a lovely person.
And how did you handle the love scenes?
Well, there was only one, Richard, unfortunately, only one.
Yeah.
And I handled it. Let's put it that way.
No, but I mean, did you talk about what you were going to do beforehand? Obviously, you probably rehearsed it, and after all, it's the young guy who's in love with the older hot woman. How did you discuss it with her?
Well, what the story was. The father leaves when I'm very young, which is Stuart Granger, and my mother dies, and I'm very lonely, and I'm there taking care of the ranch at 16 years old, and into our lives comes this woman who takes up with Stuart Granger, and she's so nice to me. This is in the film, and I get smitten, get a crush. And we're talking in a scene about a couple of things, and I just reach over and kiss her. And then I'm upset about it and embarrassed about it. That was the extent.
Yeah, I must say, I thought you did that brilliantly, and I thought that was the best scene in the film because you could see that you it was impulsive and then you were embarrassed by it. The embarrassed part is harder to act, you know, and I think you did that really well without complimenting you too much, which I can't do. I shouldn't
Please
do.
don't. You know me, Richard. I
Okay,
don't talk very much about me.
so let's move on now. How did you get the gig to do Battle of the Bulge?
Oh, well, I was living in Spain. I went to Spain in May of 63.
Okay, tell me why you went to Spain.
I just got fed up with a lot of the bullshit here in Hollywood. And it was getting more and more difficult to get roles, the kind of roles that I wanted. And I'd had that series. Well, it wasn't my series, it was Hugh O'Brien's series, but I had a running part in The Legend of Wyatt Earp. And you know how things change, people start looking for different things, different types of stories and stuff. And I wasn't getting the parts that I wanted. And I thought, well, I'm going over to Spain because they were making all kinds of films over there, and I was bound to get into something. So I went over there, and the very first film that I got into, funnily enough, was Gunfighters of Casa Grande,
Hmm.
which was a Spanish cowboy film.
Hmm.
And I had a leading part in that. And from that, the director, and I think it was the director producer, saw me, saw some rushes, which are what they show you after. Rushes are when, for those that don't know, rushes are when at the end of the day, they go into a screening room and they show bits of what was taken that day. And evidently somebody saw it, and they called me in for a part in A Thin Red Line with Keir Delay, Jack Warden, which I got.
Hmm.
And it was a good part. And then when Warner Brothers brought Battle of the Bulge over, they were looking for American actors, and everybody had to audition. I auditioned, and I got the part. And it turned out pretty well. It was the first time that I played a part where it was sort of comedy. I was sort of the comedy person in it
Yes.
because I was playing a naive young person saying stupid things,
Yeah.
which kind of hang with me, you know. I say stupid things all the time.
You were the sidekick to Telly
Telly
Savalas,
Savalas.
who was
Yeah,
supposed to be the tough older guy, and you were kind of hey, you guys kind of
yeah,
guy.
exactly. And he was always annoyed with me, always annoyed. I mean, in the film.
Yeah.
So everything, you know, there was one scene where we come to a stop in the tank. I was a tank driver. We come to a stop, and everybody gets out of the tank, and I jump out of the tank last. And I went, "Oh boy, are we going to see some Germans?" You know, and he looks at me, and I mean, it was just one of those kind of parts. Telly was great. He's a real good networker. He would go around to everybody, you know, and tell his stories, and he was a funny guy. And oh, I got along great with him. You know, the person I really got along with in that film was Charlie Bronson.
Yeah.
He and I got to be very friendly, and he came over to London when I was there and visited me. He was, oh, can I just interject something very funny?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I was staying with a guy by the name of Jericho Brown, who I knew in Hollywood, a great big 6'6" singer, very good singer. And he was trying to be an actor, and we were living in this one room with a kitchen off to the side apartment off of Sloane Avenue in Chelsea. And Charlie came to visit me. And when he came upstairs to the room, and he sat down on the chair, and we were all talking, and Jericho was there. And Jericho, trying to get in with him, said, "Hey, Chuck." And this is how he said, "Hey, Chuck, you know, I know lots of birds around here. How about if we all..." And Bronson said, "Hey, you, whatever your name is, don't call me Chuck. And I don't need you to fix me up with a girl. Anyway, I'm married, so fuck off." I'll never forget that guy. The 6'6" guy kind of shrunk into himself. There's a story about that too, which I'll tell you later. But you know,
Well, this is an interview, so you could tell the story now if it's funny.
after I left Spain and we moved to London, I moved there because I wanted to get into the record business. Everybody was talking about, band, groups being formed and people making hit records. And I thought, hey, I can do that. Because I'd sung with a group in Spain called Los Flaps, and we had a couple of chart records. And I thought, well, if I can do it in Spain, I can do it in London. So I came to London, came in, didn't do anything particular. And one day the doorbell rings and it's the home office at the door. And they said to me, "Hey, Steve Rowland?" I said, "Yes." They said, "Your passport is overdue. You're going to have to leave the country and you're going to have to leave it within 48 hours. So I left the country, had to leave, went back to Barcelona where I was staying with my father. And it was I was lucky because I had gone out with a girl in London that had connections. I didn't know this, but she was a nice girl. And she and I got along very well. And I called her when I was in, I said, "They've deported me from London. I want to come back," blah, 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 because I had met Jack Baverstock, who was the head of Fontana Records. And he was very interested in signing me as a recording artist. Great. Here I am back in Barcelona. So she went and talked to him and probably some of her connections. And they brought me in on a work permit. Jack Baverstock said, "We are going to use Steve Rowland as a record producer because he's American. And anything that he produces, we can release easily in the States." That was the point.
That was
The home office went for it, but they said, "We are going to check in the next 6 months. And if he hasn't made any records, he's going right back to Barcelona." Well, the very first record I made was Hold Tight with Dave Dee Dozy, Beaky Mickey Tix, and it was a silver record. It sold 250,000 copies. So I was in.
You continued to make 12 more top 5 records with them.
Well, that's true. But I have to give a lot of credit to Howard and Blakely, who were the writers and the managers of the group, because they wrote great songs.
Yes.
And they were all, my way of producing was like directing a film. First act, second act, third act. And I did everything, as you know, because we worked together, as a film. So all the songs that they wrote were storyline plots, Legend of Xanadu, #1, Last Night in Soho. All these were stories.
Yes.
So they worked for a while. And then Dave Dee decided that he didn't want to do those kind of records anymore, that they wanted to do their kind of records. And so we broke up.
Yeah. But I mean, let's face it, they were writing those story songs, weren't they?
They were, but Dave Dee and the band didn't like it after a while. They wanted to do their stuff. They wanted to be cred.
Yeah.
And you can't be cred unless you are cred.
And never had another hit.
Well, they never did anyway.
But I'm glad you've told people how you conceptualize your productions. But I remember when we did Starship Trooper, you actually had a storyboard made of the entire thing, which of course they used some of that for the video, and which of course was in its infancy in those days. But you've always thought visually, and you've always had the idea from the very beginning, as you can see from Hold Tight and Xanadu, of using sound effects as one of your production sort of.
Well, it was just coming in then, Richard. If you remember, they were just starting to use the Atari and bring in sound effects and things like that. And don't you remember, we made up our own. Remember and we talked about it because you, coming from Hollywood like I did, you knew what I was talking about. You were one of the only ones.
Yeah.
And we used to talk about it.
Well, I mean, I love that idea because then you had a clear direction, which was excitement, events. The whole thing was to produce events on the record.
Well, that's it. And certainly Legend of Xanadu with the whip, that I had to make that. Today you just use a plug-in,
Yeah, I know. I felt the end of that, but
well, Richard, come on, you got to tell that story when you were when I brought you over to Hansa and Peter Peter was looking for a country singer to sing this song. I forget the name of the song. Tell a story, because you tell it so.
Well, yeah, the head of Hansa Records was
Peter Meisel.
Peter Meisel, who was a German guy, very, very nice guy, but very opinionated, let's say. And he had this country song who found the song? Did he find the song?
He found it.
Yeah,
I think it was something that Paul Simon had written or someone like that.
I don't remember what the song was, but he
don't
he
either.
was trying to find somebody to sing it, and they auditioned a lot of people. And I said, wait a minute, Steve would be the perfect guy to do this. And I believe, Steve, you told me, no, you can't do that. He'll never accept that. He'll never. And so I said, okay, let's do it anyway, but let's have you sing it, but we'll call you a different name. Now, I don't remember the name we
I
chose,
don't either.
but it was very funny. It was something like, Hutch Chuckinson or something like that. It was some weird name we'd picked, some very country sounding name. And so we recorded it. We went in the studio and did the recording. And I took it back to Peter Meisel, and he said, "Yes, this is what we want. This is it. This is." And I said, "That's great. That's great." And he says, "You must find this singer. He's brilliant. He's wonderful." And I said, "Okay." Now, was it you who told him or me who told him?
I told him much later on, because you went back and you said, the singer is not here, he's left town or something like that.
Yeah, I was trying to get away with it. And
well, I said, Richard, I can't say it's me. I'm not supposed to be singing stuff for him.
Yes, and we should explain to the audience also that Steve was working as A&R. That was his job. He was A&R and a house producer. So in Peter Meisel's opinion, he could not be allowed to be an artist and a singer. And the funny thing was that we finally had to tell him, because he was going to release the record. And I said, well, actually, Peter, it was actually Steve who sung that. He said, what? And then he had to cover himself. So he says, "Oh, of course, I knew. I was just joking. Of course, we can't release it, and I didn't really like it very much. But I was just joking. I was playing along. I knew it was Steve all along." Well, of course, he didn't. But we're getting ahead of ourselves in a way, because I want to get back to your production career. So we've done Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick, and Titch. But then after that, you then did some other things. For instance, there was a group called The Herd who you discovered.
Yeah, The Herd I did before Dave D. The Herd was the first group that I did. They had Gary Taylor was singing, and so was, what's his name, the keyboard player. They were doing very kind of cutesy type, alternative songs. And I put them with Howard and Blakely. And Howard and Blakely wrote them songs. And the very first one they wrote, which was a big hit, was called From the Underworld.
Right.
Morpheus Descending, the same story. And that was a big hit. And we used an orchestra. And it was very funny with that group. In those days, I don't know whether it's like this today, but then you had to be cred, man. If you weren't cred, you couldn't talk to anybody. The papers would put you down and all that. Oh, he's nothing but pop. So they wanted to be cred, and they didn't like those stories. They didn't like those kind of records. So the second record we did was a striptease type number, and that was a hit.
Right.
And then we did the big hit, which was I Don't Want Our Loving to Die, which I got Peter Frampton to sing. And there was a fight to get him to sing that.
But he was already the guitarist in the group, wasn't he?
He was the guitarist in the group, but he didn't want to sing.
Yeah.
But he was 15 years old at the time, and he was a terrific guitarist. Yeah. Terrific, as is proven. He's still going.
Yeah.
And, like all groups, even my own group, after a while, they start thinking they want to do it their way.
Yes.
And he met up with, the Small Faces, and he went on to join, what was the guy's name that killed himself, burned himself to death? They made up Frampton's Camel, and he joined that.
Right.
And then he had his own band.
Right.
Of course, Frampton Comes Alive was a big hit album.
When you told me about it before, you said that you had always seen him as being very talented, but the rest of the group thought, they were the stars and didn't want this young kid to be the star. Is that the sort of way you were?
Well, in a way, I mean, whenever you went into mixing, and you know this from your own experiences, every member of the group wanted their instrument up loud. Well, when you're mixing, you can't do that. You can't mix records like that.
No, certainly.
That's basically what happened with the Herd.
Which is
And
why
then-
in later days you refused to allow the artist to come into the studio.
That's right, because the only person that would allow to come in the studio was the vocalist. To make sure that you could hear, because there was a trend in the 60s to kind of bury the vocal. If you remember, it was always kind of you buried the vocal a bit like the rest of the group.
Well, I remember when I was working with Cat Stevens around, the late 70s. And one of the things he told me, which I always remembered, was he said, make the vocal so that you have to lean in a little bit to hear it, not
Exactly.
do this. But he said it's a very delicate balance. So if you make them lean in too much, it's too much hard work. It should be something that they want more of. Always leave them wanting more, just like the movies, just like vaudeville. Always leave them wanting more. So
Exactly right.
yeah, and
Exactly right.
yeah,
And I would fight with these people in the studio. My thing was to play it as loud as you can on the monitors and then put it down through a radio, that what I had on the desk.
sure,
And if you could hear it as clearly both places,
yeah.
and you were doing well.
Now
Well,
in those days, were you working 4-track, 8-track? What was
started 4-track,
right?
but I will say this, Richard, and I got a very good compliment from the people at Billboard for this. When I made that album, Coming from Reality, with Rodriguez, I made sure that you could hear every syllable of him, because the most important thing was his songs and him, not the backing.
Sure.
And they mentioned that. There's this guy that came and, to the premieres and everything. He cornered me and he said, I love the way you produced that album, because I could hear everything that Rodriguez was singing and what he was talking about. And it was as though he was in the room with me. And I said, well, I tried really, really hard to get that effect for the artist's sake. What is he selling? He's selling his work, his writing.
Yes.
And the backing may be good, but the backing is secondary to the song and to the artist.
Indeed. Now, in those days, in the 60s, you had a pretty illustrious set of session musicians working with you.
All the guys from the big bands. I made an album called the London Sessions album with Jerry Lee Lewis. And the idea was to use all the name artists from the other band.
For your normal session work, though, you had guys who later formed a fairly big group, which was called Led Zeppelin. That's one of the reasons why your tracks always sounded great, because you had incredible guys doing it.
And I used to tell them what I was just saying to you about the taste. I made sure that the drums were tuned to the key of G. I made sure that everything was in tune. A lot of guys, they don't really get things in tune. And it made the record sound better. If you do a record and something in there is out of tune, man, you hear it. Because they always did great things. They spent as much time as they needed to, and as I needed them to.
So now, after all of these wonderful experiences producing other people, I want you to tell me about, that's why we started with Mei Lin in this thing. I want to hear about the family dog.
Well, the family dog was something I'd always wanted to do, because I loved Fifth Dimension, and I loved all those groups, and I love Mamas and Papas, and I thought, well, what? There's none in England. Let's see if we can put one together. So I was very friendly with Albert Hammond, Mike Hazelwood, God rest his soul. And the idea was to have the three of us and a couple of girls. Way of Life, of course, was a big hit, #2. We did pretty well. With the group alone, we cut 24 tracks. And when I took it on solo and still called it Steve Rowland and the Family Dog, all in all, we cut 42 tracks.
Right.
and they've released them now. Cherry Red Records.
Yeah, but my favorite track of all the ones that you did, of course, is Sympathy, which you did a fantastic vocal on. And again, I think you sung that song very much as an actor. Who wrote that song, Sympathy?
Sympathy was written by a group called Rare Bird. They did a great record of it, really a great record. They were just ordinary looking guys. And in our group, we had these glamorous girls and all that. And I think that's probably why.
Yeah, the glamorous girls, by the way, were always changing, weren't they?
I'll tell you why they were changing. They were changing because either fathers or brothers or sisters or boyfriends used to make demands. They wanted them to sing the lead. They wanted them to do this and that. And then they would give you an ultimatum. Either that happens or they're out of the group. So I said, fine, goodbye. And I would get another girl. There was all kinds of very good singers around, as you know, that are more than happy to do that.
A lot of people talk about the 60s in London. A lot of people worship it as being some golden magical period where there was nothing but peace, love, and brown rice, plenty of marijuana and sex. But tell me what it was really like to be living, not only living in London during that period of the 60s, but also you were a pretty prominent cat in those days. You were a successful record producer, successful artist.
London was the spot in the universe. That's where all the great music was coming from. Some films were, the James Bond films and all that were coming out of there. It was the place to be. And I had lots of hot and cold running girls. I didn't smoke. I didn't do drugs, not because I was against it, but because I just particularly didn't like it. I didn't like the feeling of being out of myself, And I had a very bad experience before I went to Europe with penicillin, where I was dead for 9 seconds and they went into my heart, and then, well, that's another story. But it always reminded me that if you take something that you're not sure of, something can happen. Kind of silly, but that's why I didn't. No. So I missed out on a lot of those wild parties. And the ones that I went to, when it got too wild, I was out of it because I was considered, no, man, he doesn't know anything. He's not in with us. So
you were actually ostracized by people who were smoking dope and taking other things.
Well, there was a couple of reasons. Number one, I was making pop records, which was considered nothing. Number two, I was American. And there was kind of a tension about being American and being British. And number three, I wasn't credible, if you know what I mean. They wanted cred. So that's why. But as you know, Richard, we had a lot of fun. We did a lot of things, and there was lots of interesting things to do in England. I got involved in motocross. I got involved in kart racing, which I love doing. And so I was in the gym all the time. So, and even, when I got you in the gym, I used to say, what are you doing, Richard? And you used to say, I don't want to be tortured.
Yeah. Well, but that's interesting that it was, you were obviously going to be a fish out of water wherever you went, because
I still am.
Because you came from a unique background of a film artistic background. You'd already, by the time you hit London, you had already done films, TV shows. You had already been in successful groups, like in Spain, Los Flaps, which I won't even discuss the name of that group, but we'll go on. And so you'd already done those things. So most people, I think, in the 60s, they were wannabes, or they were already kind of current stars, but you were the guy in the middle, because you already knew what it was like to be working with top people, top musicians, top actors. You already knew that. So you were somewhat different from the ordinary person of the 60s in London.
I didn't go to parties if I could help it. when I got into the dance time, when everybody was making dance records, I had to go to these clubs and stay up until 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning, and I hated it.
You even ran one of the clubs, if I
Yeah, I
remember.
did, the Valbon.
The Valbon, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and put on acts.
Well,
Yeah.
talking about yourself on this show, of course, is going to make you a superstar because everybody knows that Radio Richard is the way to start for
Absolutely.
everyone.
Radio Richard, you were doing some of this in England. You should have been doing a television.
The absolute funniest thing that's ever happened in your career, the funniest story that you have of your career.
Oh, Richard, I was ducking that one. Well, I will start by saying we in Ljubljana, Yugoslavia at the time, we did a concert, and the concert included the group Family Dog, which is my group. It included the Marmalade, and we went to a stadium, and there was about 10,000 people or so there, and we did the concert was very, very successful. And so we were very happy at the end of it. And we went back to the hotel. Now, let me explain the hotel. The hotel was built like a hexagon, and they had windows. I think it had about 6 or 8 floors, and it went, all the sides had windows from the floor to the ceiling, great big windows. And they had a balcony. Each room had a balcony. So we were residents in that hotel. Now, mind you, this was back in when was this? 70 something, 73 or 4, somewhere, something like that. We went there, we were getting drunk in the mezzanine, which was on the 2nd floor. And by drunk, I drink one drink and I'm out of it.
I noticed
Everybody
that.
else was drinking. We were pretty pissed.
Yeah.
And the road manager, who I will leave nameless, got very pissed, and he left us and went upstairs. And he went out on the balcony, and we're sitting in the bar area, and he put his ass over the edge of the balcony and took a shit. And the shit went patonch against the window in the bar, and then slid down like that. Then he went out in the hallway later on, took another shit and put a cocktail flag in it. So yeah, it was funny at the time. It's embarrassing, even me telling it, because I laughed like a drain, man. I tell you, I died when I saw that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there were some funny things that happened when we were doing Starship Trooper. Okay, we did a record called I Lost My Heart to a Starship Trooper with Sarah Brightman, who I brought to Hansa as the savior of the track. We had a full string section and a brass section on the record. And there was one trumpet player who will remain nameless, I guess, but he was very alcoholic. And he actually showed up at the studio drunk. So I'm out there conducting the thing. And meanwhile, I can't hear it because I'm in the studio conducting.
Not on the floor.
But the trumpet, yeah, but Steve's in the studio and he can hear every single thing. And the trumpet player, under his breath, said something like, Steve, you heard it.
Well, he was putting Richard down. He was saying, look at this weasel writing this shit. It's crap, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
And so I told Richard.
Well, not only that, though, Steve put his finger on the talkback so that everybody could hear it. And
I let the guy have it. I said, you don't like it, fuck off. You know.
Because you had already said to him, if you can't talk to my arranger like that.
No, I was really pissed off because no matter who the arranger was, it didn't matter that we were friends. It was a thing of respect. You don't say stuff like that.
No, and it was unprofessional.
It's like these people that do things off camera and they find out that they've got an open mic somewhere. And
the interesting thing is that that's the very same trumpet player I ran into years later when I was doing a session for the BBC. I did the BBC Big Band. He was the lead trumpet player of the section. And he was drunk again. And he was saying stuff. I mean, I could hear him then because I was standing very close to the band. And he said, this is a load of shit. I'm not going to do this bloody thing. And who do you think you are? Who is this? And I actually threw him out of the session. And he said, and all the musicians said, oh, you can't do that. You
Of course
can't
you
do
can.
that. And
Well,
I
the
said,
trouble
well, I
is
can't watch. Please leave the studio. And I
well,
got,
people don't stand up, Richard. People have to stand up. It's what's wrong is wrong. You
yeah.
don't do stuff like that. Not
And
if you're a
this
professional.
story may not be interesting to the public as it certainly was to us, but again, I did a television show years later with a very, very fine uh, saxophone player, brilliant saxophone player, and I had booked him and my big band, Bandzilla, for the entire show. It was the Ruby Wax show. And this guy, for the very first TV program. This is 10 weeks of TV. It's the greatest gig in the world for any musician. And of course, the first day they wanted to do a rehearse, so this guy didn't show up for the rehearsal. And it was terrible. We had to go through the whole thing. We'd do a line check for all the microphones, and he wasn't there. So finally, for the actual show, he walked in 5 minutes before we were actually due to go on. And I could tell that he was stoned in some way. And I said, don't ever do that again. And he said, well, it's okay. I'm here now. I said, no, it's not okay. You were booked for the rehearsal. So the next show, he didn't show up again for the rehearsal. So I immediately got on the phone and called a guy who I had never used before, but was very highly recommended to me, a fantastic saxophone player called Snake Davis, who you can also see another interview with on Radio Richard. And all the musicians gave him the silent treatment. All the musicians gave him the cold shoulder and other expressions. And they wouldn't talk to him at all. So on the actual show, they used to do a thing where they wanted us to warm up the audience. So they'd say, do a number. And then, so I did the show, and we were doing a track which I had arranged the original record for, Breakout. But this was my big band arrangement of it. And Snake was sitting there. I believe he was playing tenor sax on this one. But anyway, I whispered to him before, and I said, Snake, when it comes to your solo, because I knew he had a solo in it, I'm going to do this, which means take another solo and well, and he said, okay, boss. Well, I did this about maybe 12, 13 times. It was, he played a solo for probably 5 minutes, and it was ridiculous. And he just ripped the paint off cars. He was unbelievable. And at the end of that thing, not only the audience was applauding, but the guys in the band stood up and were applauding. And from then on, everybody treated him really well.
I had a very good encounter with the sax player, Errol Bostic. Remember Errol Bostic?
Sure, fantastic.
And the very first record I ever made was a thing called Outride. It's an instrumental which I wrote and played drums on. And that did pretty well. And I hired Errol Bostic to be the sax player.
Great.
Man, what a gentleman. What a great player. Came in a suit and tie to the studio. The nicest guy, and so talented, and such an original sound that he had when he played his tenor. And he did tenor and alto. I guess he could play baritone as well. He was there right on time, did the session, one solo. That's all it took. Well, Richard, there's so many stories. I mean, like, Stan Kenton's band. And when I used to go to the Lighthouse, remember that? The Lighthouse in Hermosa Beach, still there, by the way. Every Sunday they would have a jam session, and all the guys from Stan Kenton band would come. Sue Berry and Frank Rossellino, and those guys would all come. Kay Winding, and have jam session. And one day, one Sunday, Brando was there, and Brando sat in on congas. Well, it's in the book, I mean, you've read, man, I'll tell you something. If you could have recorded that, that would have been a masterpiece, what they did. All those guys took solos. what was the great guitar player? Howard Roberts? Howard
Yeah,
Roberts.
Howard Roberts.
Howard Roberts was in the band. Shelly Manne was on drums. I mean, I'm telling you, that was the place to go on Sundays.
And speaking of the book, notice that I have placed it right here.
I have noticed that.
So everybody should, if they want to read some fantastic Hollywood stories of the 50s, and also see lots of photographs, rare photographs of all of those people, stories about James Dean, stories about all these great people.
Presley, you know.
This is the book for you. Get it online.
Well,
Amazon.
you know, Richard, I thank you very much for doing that. And because I'm in the throes of writing this television series, it has been picked up by somebody. I haven't told you that. And a lot of it is based on the book. And it should be interesting. If they get this off the ground, it should be interesting because it's about the 50s when the mob ran Hollywood. You know about that. You know about all, and
Indeed, yes.
you know, and that's all in the series.
Well, Steve, thank you very much for doing this. I think this is marvelous. This is stories that you can't hear anywhere else. Radio Richard, subscribe if you can. Otherwise, just say thank you, Steve.
Whoa, whoa.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, man.